Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.
Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. Happy to be back with you again for our first show of February. First up, in Nebraska, crop production typically requires nitrogen in the form of fertilizer, which supplements the nitrogen available in the soil. However, there are factors that make nitrogen challenging. Extension Nutrient Management and Water Quality Specialist Javed Iqbal sat down with Market Journal's Bill Dodd to discuss why having a nitrogen management plan is so important. They began by talking about some ways corn prices may play into your nitrogen application decisions.
To ensure that farmers get the maximum profit on their investment, our UNL nitrogen recommendations, they consider the price of corn and fertilizers. So this price factor in nitrogen algorithm considers or is based on the diminishing effect of increasing nitrogen rate on grain yield. As the nitrogen rate increases, the corn grain yield decreases per unit of applied nitrogen. In order to, if in case when the nitrogen fertilizer is inexpensive, relative to the corn price, more nitrogen can be applied as long as it is profitable. However, at the same time, special consideration should be given to minimize the nitrogen loss.
So can you think of any instances where a farmer or producer's nitrogen efficiency can be improved?
Right, so there are many evidences when the nitrogen use efficiency can be improved. For example, nitrogen management is just like, managing nitrogen is just like risk exposure. For example, fall application of nitrogen fertilizer is less efficient than spring or in-season nitrogen application because of the potential for increased nitrate or denitrification nitrogen losses. So in order to make sure that you are getting the maximum nitrogen use efficiency, you want to apply the nitrogen close to the time when the crop needs it. Some of the recommended nitrogen can be applied at pre-plant, while most of the recommended nitrogen can be applied through side dressing or fertigation during the crop growing season, which not only increases the nitrogen use efficiency, nitrogen uptake, but it also gives more net returns on the farm.
If a producer is looking to save money on fertilizer, what recommendations would you have for them?
Sure. So the value of the corn grain yield is less than the cost of the fertilizer when the nitrogen rate exceeds the optimum or most profitable nitrogen rate that we often call economic optimum nitrogen rate. So if producers can use this economic optimum nitrogen rate, he can save money on nitrogen fertilizer while maximizing net return on the farm. So we have one UNL nitrogen algorithm or nitrogen calculator available at the website, which can help to estimate this economic optimum nitrogen rate.
What else do you think producers should know when it comes to weather conditions and nitrogen applications?
Sure. So there are many considerations for improving nitrogen use efficiency. One of the considerations that I would like to share today is using nitrogen more efficiently from different resources. So whenever we think about nitrogen management for our crop, we often think the commercial fertilizers as the single source for nitrogen. However, we ignore some other sources. For example, nitrogen from the previous leguminous crop, or nitrogen from soil organic matter mineralization, irrigation, and water. It can be credited while you are calculating nitrogen for your next crop. So there are some instances where nitrogen credits from the manure are really under credited. better crediting of nitrogen from different resources, especially from manure, can help to increase the nitrogen use efficiency.
So another reason we got you here today, we wanted to give you the opportunity to let viewers know about participation in Nebraska's On-Farm Research Network for 2020. Can you give us a little detail on the research that you're dealing with on nitrification inhibitors?
Right, sure. So snow melt during the late winter or spring precipitation events with warm conditions tend to increase the nitrate leaching potential from fall or spring applied anhydrous ammonia fertilizers. There are some nitrogen stabilizers which can help to slow down the release of nitrogen from ammonium nitrogen. So some growers may be interested to evaluate the effect of those nitrification stabilizers, for example, nitrification inhibitor. And then some growers also require to use the nitrification inhibitor by natural resource districts in order to improve the nitrogen use efficiency. To evaluate the effect of nitrification inhibitor on crop yield, on nitrogen retention and nitrogen losses, we have developed some on-farm research protocols which can help the farmers to see the effect of nitrification inhibitor on their crop yield and profit. So if any farmer is interested to test the nitrification inhibitor on their individual field, they can participate in this program. And the more details for this program are available on the Nebraska On-Farm Research Network website.
There are several on-farm research meetings this month across the state. We've got that information on the Market Journal website under this story. And while you're there, you'll also find a link to the nitrogen recommendations calculator discussed in the interview. All that's at marketjournal.unl.edu. Moving over to markets now, and this week, as the UK prepares to break free from the EU, we'll see how U.S. trade may change. Plus, the coronavirus adds another wrinkle to market instability, and the cattle inventory report does something we haven't seen in 6 years. On Tuesday, Mississippi State University livestock economist Josh Maples joined me to discuss it all. I wanted to begin this week with Brexit. So we've got the UK preparing to leave the EU. What are some impacts we could see with U.S. trade?
Yeah, that's right, Troy. This is a big story that's really kind of getting overshadowed by a lot of the other stuff that's happening in international trade. But I think the primary reason that it's getting a little overshadowed is that we still got more questions than we do answers. The backstory is the EU is a really important market, export market for U.S. agriculture, but they've got a complicated, relationship with some pretty significant barriers to ag products. So their strict stance on genetically modified crops or GMO crops, and also their strict stance on hormone use in beef are probably the two biggest examples. So this leaves us with the question, if Britain is no longer in the EU, what does a trade deal look like with just the UK itself? Will we finally be able to export beef that has, hormones have been used in beef to the UK? And I think this is a really important question, because if you look at USDA ERS had a report out, and in that report they stated that the UK imports about 48%, nearly half of their food is imported. So it's a big market and a big food market. So the real question is, okay, we know this is a big market. For years they've been part of the EU and that's had these strict barriers. Now, moving forward, what do these restrictions and regulations look like if it's just the U.S. and UK negotiating? So these are really important questions. It's important questions for the beef industry, U.S. beef industry, but there's still, at this point, more questions than we have answers. But that's what's currently going on and could be really important for the U.S. beef industry moving forward.
All right, we will wait and see. And moving on, the coronavirus has been in the news a lot. So last week we asked our analyst how the grain markets are being impacted. So this week I'll ask you about the livestock markets. What are the biggest areas of concern?
So really all of ag is kind of impacted by this, and not just all of ag, but just U.S. markets in general, right? I mean, we've seen this is just a glaring example of how uncertainty can really impact markets. If you look at which ag market in particular is probably, watching this the closest, it's got to be pork. China is a big pork importer right now, and unrelated to the coronavirus is the ASF in China. So they're importing a lot of U.S. pork right now, and so that's the key question: is the virus going to impact demand for U.S. pork in China? And I don't think we've seen, really clear evidence. I think the uncertainty piece for sure about whether that's going to happen has weighed on markets. We've seen impacts in the cattle markets as well. So we're seeing impacts right now, but I think at this point the impact is still because of uncertainty about what could happen if this thing continues to spread. So it's definitely something that's worth watching, but it's not one of those things where you can clearly say, this is what it is, because we don't know what it's going to be like over the next weeks or months. So I think it's that uncertainty piece is really kind of sitting on markets right now in a negative way.
Okay, Josh, when it comes to the cattle inventory report that was released back on January 31st, we're seeing inventory down slightly from a year ago. Can you share some details from that and how the market is positioned?
Sure. So the report was pretty well anticipated, and down about a half of a percent for all cattle and calves, 94.4 million head of all cattle and calves in the U.S. The important story here is that this is our first decline since 2014. So we've had going on the last 6 years we've been talking about larger cattle numbers, larger calf numbers that are going to turn into beef and hit the beef market. So even though it was well anticipated, it's still a significant story because we've made it past that expansion phase in the cattle industry. Troy, you know as well as anybody, the last 4 or 5 years, all we've been talking about is larger calf numbers, larger cattle on feed numbers, larger beef supplies. So if you look at the beef cow number specifically in the report, down about 1.2%, so down 375,000 head compared to January 1st of 2019. And then if you look at the beef replacement heifers number was down, our beef replacements number was down 2%. Calf crop number for 2019 was just about 1% lower than in 2018. The key piece here and what gets lost in some of these stories is even though we're finally talking about a few lower cattle supplies, 2020 is still going to be a really big beef production year. We're still looking at larger beef supplies in 2020 just because it takes so long for animals to go from calves on the ground to beef that we consume. Market impacts, again, the market I think pretty well anticipated this. The report was well in line with what was expected. So I don't think I think that's the reason we didn't see a big market impact. It wasn't a big shocker, but it does set the stage for 2020 that we're not going to be talking about these larger supplies moving forward, and that has been a key headwind to prices really since 2015, 2016. So it positions us well moving forward, and I think we're finally not going to be talking about larger supplies that have dominated the headlines for the last few years.
Thanks again to Josh. Next week we'll be joined by Jeff Peterson from Heartland Farm Partners. So if you have a question you'd like for me to ask him, email us or get in touch on social media, and I'll pass your question along. Time now for this week's weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, we had that one day back on Sunday that was just gorgeous. Since then, though, back to reality with the chilly weather. What can we expect in our forecast?
Well, Troy, you're exactly correct. We did see some warmer temperatures last week, and only to see the cold air return in earnest during this week. A little bit of snow activity across the state, but nothing of major consequence. Mostly we're in the trace to 1 inch range, except for a little bit of heavier snow, moderate snow during the midweek period in the Panhandle, where we had 1 to 3 inches. Now, as we go forward this next week, we are expecting a cooler temperatures, at least for the first half of the forecast, and then we will start to see a warming trend as we get to next weekend. And if we can wait just a bit longer, at least from the GFS model standpoint, as we get into the third full week of this month, it does look like a more significant warming trend might be in store for a substantial portion of the western half of the United States. So we look at the upper air models from today. We're basically looking at low pressure to our west. The trough that just passed through yesterday is now to our east. We're going to get a little ridging, so we're going to be temperatures in the mid-40s, probably the nicest day of this weekend. Low pressure develops in the Nebraska Panhandle, just not a lot of moisture to work with, and it's moving too fast. So all the extensive precipitation will occur over the northern Rockies. Now, as we go into Sunday, we're going to see that energy slide to our east. Another low pressure develops to the southwest, but high pressure is firmly in control, so we're not going to see return moisture into our region. We're going to be a little bit cooler, but mostly just scattered flurry activity across the northern part of the state with a more concentrated snowfall to our north and east. On Monday, the trough tries to deepen a little bit more, brings a little bit cooler air into our region, reinforcing what comes in on Sunday. High pressure firmly in control. Major concentrated low pressure areas over the western Great Lakes, so most of flurry activity will remain to our north and our northwest. And then on Tuesday, we start to see this trough deepen, bringing much colder air into the eastern United States as low pressure stacks up over eastern portions of Montana and western South Dakota, and that will pull toward the southeast and bring some light flurry activity to the northern part of the state. More importantly, as we go into Wednesday, we start to see this trough weakening somewhat as it lifts toward the northeast, so the coldest air will start to shunt off to our northeast. Northeastern Nebraska probably going to be the coldest during this period on Wednesday, with that high pressure directly overhead, and maybe some light flurry activity, but no significant accumulations of snowfall. And then as we get into Thursday, the high pressure ridge starts to build into our region, that trough lifts off into the northeast, and we start to see a warming trend as we start to get on the backside of this high pressure system, bringing in a southeasterly to southerly flow. We may see a little bit of light precipitation in the southwest and south central Nebraska, nothing overwhelming. And then we start to see a moderation on Friday with a little trough trying to come into our region. Low pressure stacks up in eastern Dakotas and in eastern Montana. That will bring a little bit of moisture to the north, but the most concentrated area of precipitation will be across the North Dakota. If we look a little farther from next Thursday to the following Tuesday, it includes this cool stretch. Below normal temperatures is going to be the norm in the western United States. Precipitation above normal, although this may be overplayed, and I think most of it is going to be concentrated on the 15th and the 16th when there is a storm system expected to roll out of the western United States. So overall, really not a bad forecast for this time of the year. A little cooler than normal the first half, warmer than normal the second half. So Troy, looks like things are on the upswing as we get toward the end of the month.
Thanks, Al. Moving on, and providing custom hire services can provide a good source of added revenue. In fact, many next-generation farm operations are looking at the opportunity of providing custom work or machine hire services in their area. Market Journal's Bill Dodd has some things these potential entrepreneurs may want to keep in mind as they navigate their potential enterprise. Bill?
Thanks, Troy. Now, while starting your own custom farming services may seem like a no-brainer to some, in many cases, while this additional business could mean added revenue as a part-time job for many potential entrepreneurs, there may be a few key details that may still need to be taken into account. So, you want to generate a little extra income, and providing custom services seems like the route you should take. If that's the case, Associate Extension Educator Glennis McClure makes it very clear there are several things that you should keep in mind when taking on such an endeavor.
And there's a number of things that go into sort of looking at and researching feasibility, into an operation. So what's included in that? It's like, are there actually potential customers out there that can take advantage and utilize your services? And farmers are really interested in making sure things happen when they need to happen. And so, would you have the custom services available when they need it? I mean, that's a kind of a key question, because if you're also doing your own farming operation, how does that fit into the scheme of things? And then what would be your competitive advantage? What would you have to offer that others that are doing custom services, might be offering? And I also think with the feasibility, you want to look at the resources that you have. Is there enough labor to cover what you need to do in your operation and also do some custom hire services? Do you have the financial backing? How about the knowledge of how to get the job done properly? Are you good at planting? Are you good at harvesting? Those kinds of things. making sure that your equipment is reliable and that you've got the support of family and friends in this operation. I think those are kinds of things that go into a feasibility search as you are thinking about this.
When all of these factors are taken into account, it's time to dive into how you plan to price out your services. Pricing custom services can be a challenge to say the least. In order to help you determine your rates, it should be noted that many universities make custom reports available. However, the information supplied in these reports shouldn't be the only guidelines you use when pricing out your services.
A key thing, of course, that I talk to people a lot about as they're setting custom rates is that they really need to focus and understand their ownership costs and their operating costs of equipment. And we have a graphic here that provides, shows some of the factors that go into these costs. So one of the key or the largest costs that really need to be considered, of course, is depreciation. Over time, that equipment's going to depreciate. And so what is that real depreciation? Of course, interest costs. There's an opportunity cost of ownership, as well as you may be paying for interest as you're buying equipment as well. There's property taxes that we pay on equipment that goes into the cost. Housing, do you have a shed? Do you have a place to put this equipment to keep it, in the times that you're not using it? And also, of course, insurance. But then there's the operating costs too that we need to add together, and that's the fuel and lubricants, labor costs. Are you paying somebody else to operate, or are you charging for your time appropriately to do these kinds of machine hire jobs? Machinery repairs and maintenance can be huge as well, and so that needs to be taken into consideration. And then if you're doing certain types of custom jobs, like baling hay, are you including the wire in your charges, okay? So once you've determined your ownership and your operating costs, then you really need to think about, am I covering, again, my labor? Is there a margin that I'm going to add for a profit? And also a risk kind of factor into it.
Now that you've gone through most of your research and figured out just how you want to price out your services, the last thing you need to consider is just how you're going to get the word of your services out to potential clients.
Well, I look at the marketing as similar to what you do with any kind of a business. Of course, the more relationships you have, let's say with farm managers or retired farmers that might utilize these kinds of services, those are key in making personal contacts and getting to know those people and getting to know your work ethic and how well you do things with this. But also like word of mouth referrals can be really key. So if you do a good job, of course, that word can spread. Also, posting flyers, handing out business cards, placing ads are, of course, those typical ways to advertise. I think of a sort of a mobile billboard. You could have, on the side of your truck, one of those magnetic posters saying, that you are doing custom services. So it doesn't hurt to do those things. Similar to any kind of business, we can do these things to promote what we're doing with the custom hire service as well.
So Troy, to sum it all up, while the idea of custom services may be a feasible option for many to undertake, it's a decision that shouldn't be made hastily or taken lightly for that matter. So if you'd like any more insights like this from Glennis, be sure to check out her articles at cropwatch.unl.edu. And Troy, that's what I got my eye on this week. I'll send it back to you.
Thanks, Bill. Finally today, it's that time of year to start wrapping up your applications for several farm policy programs. The Agricultural Risk Coverage and Price Loss Coverage Programs, or ARC and PLC for short, have a March 15th deadline for applications. And with tens of thousands of farms left to apply, officials at the FSA are strongly suggesting setting up your appointment as soon as possible. ARC and PLC, in combination with crop insurance, are the foundation of the farm safety net for crop producers. And they're structured a little bit differently in the 2018 Farm Bill. Unlike the 2014 Farm Bill that locked you into one program or the other for the life of the bill, producers will now have the freedom to change coverage in later seasons.
That's an important flexibility, I think, that I want producers to be aware of, that was created with the 2018 Farm Bill. So the elections that they're making this time around are for 2019 and 2020. And then after that, they'll be able to make that election annually for 2021, 2022, and 2023. So it's a new flexibility that I think will be important for producers to be able to make some adaptations later on, depending on what's going on in the market and those other conditions.
If you still have questions or need a bit of direction on which of these programs will best suit the needs of your operation, there's a webinar produced by the FSA in coordination with Nebraska Extension. That's available online at the link on your screen. Also worth noting, if you've already elected for one program and wish to switch to the other, you have until March 16th to get that done. Another program that may pique your interest is the CRP, or Conservation Reserve Program. This is a program designed to take marginally productive cropland out of production and put it into wildlife and natural resource conservation. The program aims to improve upon issues like soil erosion, water quality improvements, and wildlife benefits in order to benefit the landowner as well as the land itself.
It's a long-term contract. You get rental payments on an annual basis for enrolling those acres into this program. And then you also get the environmental benefits that come with putting long-term cover, meaning grasses and trees, on those acres.
The deadline for the CRP program is February 28th, and Bobbie highly recommends calling in and setting up an appointment to go over your application before the deadline. Lastly, the Livestock Indemnity Program, or LIP, is a multiple-step application process. So any producers who had livestock losses in 2019 who turned in their notice of loss to the FSA have until March 2nd to finish the application and documentation process for any 2019 losses.
If it's a producer who filed their notice of loss and maybe got busy throughout the year, hasn't come in and done that documentation or application for payments, they have until March 2nd to do that. And documentation is a very important part of that program. We need to have beginning and ending inventories to show and documentation of those losses.
Okay, so one more time, the deadline for ARC and PLC is March 15th. Applications for CRP are due by February 28th, and the final application and documentation deadlines for livestock indemnity are on March 2nd. For more information, you can visit fsa.usda.gov/state-offices/Nebraska. The link to everything is on the Market Journal website, too. That's going to do it for this week's show. Hope you enjoyed it, and if you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app or follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. Next week, Jeff Peterson is our market analyst, and see how hemp harvest went for one local producer. Hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.